Hello, good morning one and all. We are starting the first session of this series of workshop. Today's speaker is Sri Chandrasekhar Reddy. It is my immense pleasure to introduce Sri Chandrasekhar Reddy to the audience. Sri Chandrasekhar Reddy is interested in cybersecurity research and education. His experience includes information and network security, exploit and malware research, wireless security, web security, email security, cyber forensics and compliance. Sri Chandrasekhar Reddy finished his graduation from BITS Pilani in 2001. He did the first IPv6 remote security project for Unix systems in the year 2000 and presented it to Computer Systems Department at BITS Pilani. He educates government officials, college students, and various corporate technical analysts on latest security concepts and helps them in dealing with day-to-day challenges in information and infrastructure security, along with system administration troubleshooting. Sri Chandrasekhar has more than 19 years of experience in corporate industry, where he was involved in various critical project executions. His latest cybersecurity startup, Cognor, specializes in making critical systems completely unhackable by any external and internal threats. After 1 year of operations, it was acquired by US company. Now he started his next cybersecurity startup called CSCC Labs Private Limited. So this is the brief introduction of Sri Chandrasekhar Reddy. Sir, it is our privilege to have you as a resource person for the next 2 days, that is for today and tomorrow. Now I request Sri Chandrasekhar Reddy to take over the session. Sir, please.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, can you please make me host so that I can share my computer?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So first of all, good morning to everybody. I know it's already close to 2 hours of session has been done by allied speakers and the people who are experts in their respective areas, like Venkatesh Murthy and other dignitaries. So what I'm going to do is today for the next close to 1.5 hours, I'm going to take you through the basics of the file storage systems. So that is one of my topic today. And then later after lunch today, we are going to have again 1.5 hour session. So why I'm saying 1.5 hour session, though it has been kept for 2 hours. So the way I'm planning is I'm going to take you through the fundamentals because this is most of the theory session. I'm trying to make it as much interactive as possible so that you don't fall asleep or you don't lose the interest, because the end of the day these are the basics. So the basics we need to understand in a logical way so that as we keep move forward to the practical sessions which are going to come up in this week, so you will be able to correlate in a much more logical way so that they stay in your mind, or you can be able to visualize many possibilities of solving the problem through different techniques in a better way. So that's the whole intention of this whole thing. Okay, so let me share my screen. Okay, I hope you are able to see my screen.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. And I also recommend if any of you have any questions, though most of these things are theoretical things, but logically, if you are getting stuck, you are not able to visualize during our talk or even post our talk, please post those questions either in the chat, or I'm going to give my email address anyways, or most of these questions can be easily get covered by a lot of YouTube videos, and a lot of blogs has been written on this thing, because these are theirs for last multiple decades. The fundamentals will never change, right? The only thing is we are coming with a newer ways of technologies for a faster speed, more storage, less cost, and more computing power, and all those things. That's it. But you will be able to get these things anywhere get answered. But my recommendation is please understand these things in a more structured, logical way so that things can be more better as we keep move forward. So with that, I'm going to start the first session. So as the session is all about introduction to the storage system, so it's all about what are the different kind of storage systems are available in this computing world, and a little bit about the ABCs of what are they, how they have been called, how they have been evolved, and so we will talk a little bit about all those things. So that's exactly what the session is being planned. So it starts from what is data to it goes to the evolving technologies in the storage systems as of today, and what is going to come up in the future as we talk about this. So, okay, so let us talk about end of the day, anything in computer. I mean, it's all about we do create data, we share the data, we manipulate the data, we process the data. Mm, I mean, that's exactly what it is going to happen. It's all about data. So the data can be in multiple formats, video, audio, text, and many other ways. I mean, whatever we've been seeing it on a day-to-day basis. That's what the whole data is all about. Data is constantly flowing from computing, say from one computer to another computer or one device to another device. It may be a mobile phone, it may be a pad, it may be a computer. Um, I mean, where end of the day, the end user is actually able to see it. And also, there are a lot of things going to happen in between before it comes to the end user or the end computing device. So end of the day, the data is basically it's just pieces of information which is I mean kept on the somewhere in the disk or somewhere in the storage system, and ultimately that gets retrieved by different ways and means. We are going to talk about it and to do multiple things. Okay, and how it will be stored, and what devices will it pass on the way it is being stored and processed is I mean exactly we're going to talk about it. But at the end of the day, data is something which is going to be on one of the device, and then ultimately we retrieve it through multiple mechanisms to view it, to manipulate it, to edit it, or whatever it is. Again, we either store it back or we again send it to somewhere else. So again, so when the data is very clear, data is all about what we understand, the video, audio, text, whatnot. And what is a storage system? Storage system is the process in which the entire digital data, I mean, end of the day, that it's zeros and ones, bits of zeros and ones. Again, when it comes back to the next level, it is an ASCII format, or and then again it gets translated to different languages. We can to view it, to visualize it, to our own understanding in different geographies. And at the end of the day, this data, when it is going back and sitting onto the end device and a hardware device, basically, it's basically a simple hardware technology which we use and which we've been using it for decades from the time the entire computing whole thing started. And we're going to see some of those things as we keep talking about. So storage is where exactly the data gets stored. It's as simple as that. And what is the purpose of the storage system? Again, the storage system purpose is, again, when it comes to the storage systems, there are multiple things. The data basically which there are some system storages where the data will be stored temporarily for a faster access, so that we can manipulate the data, we can do a lot of computations and a lot of other whatever mathematical, I mean logical checks on the data. So we need to keep the data, a part of the data or a chunk of the data in a temporary storage, so that for the faster access by the program. And then obviously there is a permanent storage where it gets stored on the disk, so that even when the system gets rebooted, when it goes to offline, when the power is off, also still the data is there. So obviously there are two type of storages are there, temporary and permanent storage. And again, the purposes are very evident as we talk about. I mean, in terms of what we wanted to do and why this whole mechanism of storage system is divided into multiple things. And that's what it's been just mentioned. I mean, we use it for storing and porting and extracting ultimately. So we store it, we port it, and we extract it ultimately. That's it. So what is the difference between the memory and storage? I mean, again, the storage system is a very high level word. And when it gets a little just, if you wanted to bifurcate the storage into multiple naming conventions, maybe it's a memory is there and storage. Memory is obviously as the name suggests, it's a memory, a short-term data storage. Again, for as I just mentioned about it, for a faster retrieval, faster access, for faster computing, whatever it is. And storage is something which is going to be for a long-term basis. So we wanted to keep it even in the offline or permanently on the disk, basically. So again, both are them hardware, and just that the purposes are different: memory storage and as well as permanent storage. So I'm sure this a lot of these words, I mean, we've been hearing it, some of them. Maybe some of the words I started hearing about from the days when I was studying, like the floppy disks and CD-ROMs and whatnot. But again, if you really look back, when it started way back in 80s, late 80s, uh, the initial storage system started with something called punch cards. I mean, they used to be like holes and all those things. I mean, we'll be seeing the images of the same things. But the interesting thing is, the approximate size of each punch card is going to be 0.08 kilobytes. So the amount of data what a punch card can hold is it is so less. It's almost like not even the simplest icon size nowadays. So it's a few bytes kind of. So and then they took almost 40 years to increase that 0.08 kilobytes to a 48 KB. I mean, obviously it's like hundreds and thousands of time. When you look at the size, the magnitude of the size, what they came up with a magnetic drum, it used to be a big one. But that's how, I mean, the technology, it used to take so much time, to evolve to the bigger levels. After that, I mean, it was fairly every couple of years, it was really moving into a much more bigger storage holding types, and then slowly it went into kilobytes to MBs to GBs to terabytes and whatnot. And now today we have a completely unlimited kind of a data. I mean, when I say unlimited, it is not really an unlimited, but the point is literally we can on the fly, we can keep on adding as many disks as we want to the cloud storage data systems like Azure and AWS and Google. I mean, there are many people, VMware, IBM, and DigitalOcean, whatnot. So this is how the whole uh, the data storage capacity increased or improved over the period of time, not only just in the size, but the access in terms of how fast we can access and how big kind of data we can keep it and all those things. And because all these things are very important for our day-to-day banking systems, financial systems, bio-related stuff, pharmacy, whatnot. I mean, day-to-day everything is ultimately the data is it's all about data getting exchanged from one place to another place. And so let us understand a little bit about the storage hierarchy, because this is a little important, because if you look at the way how the small storage to the highest storage, if you look at this diagram, I mean, a simple kind of a pyramid diagram. If you look at the top one are the smallest ones, and as we keep going down, these are the big storage devices where the basically more data can store as we keep going down. And other ways, the more top in this hierarchy, it is faster to access the data for the program. Basically, at the end of the day, when we access that specific data for programmatical ways, it may be whatever we are going to do it. So it is going to be faster in the top, and it is going to be little slow in the down, because obviously there are multiple things which are going to come up, which we are going to talk about it. And then the cost also, as it is in the top, the cost is going to be more, and as it is going to be down, the cost is going to be low. So that's how we can talk about these three parameters: the cost and the speed, and how fast we can access the data when it really comes from the registers, cache to main memory, flash memory, magnetic, optimal, and different completely offline magnetic tapes, which we can take it out and put it in a some other external storage system for a backup, recovery, and BCPDR related stuff. Okay, so just whatever we just seen some time back, the way how the whole storage systems has been evolved or invented. The way how they used to look at it, the punch cards used to look. I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, even I saw it physically anywhere. When I was in Infosys, I used to see one punch card somewhere. They kept it in one of the showcase. But more likely, we saw most of these things from here. The magnetic tape, obviously, we saw many of these things, cassettes, and then the magnetic core, and obviously hard disks. Most of our desktops and some of the olden laptops also still has the HDDs. Nowadays, we are coming up with a more of SSD, which are much more small in size and more faster access. So when you start the computer, that's why nowadays the laptops are much faster booting time. We don't have to delay it much because um, not only the size is decreased, but the way how the data can be accessed by the program is much faster. So it's just the way how they look at it. I mean, there is nothing great out here, but obviously this is what just, I mean, it's good if any of you have any of these things, better keep some of these things to show it to our next generation. And yeah, so usage of the storage system. So end of the day, okay, there is a storage system. I mean, like what we saw in the previous slide. There are multiple ways how this the data can store in multiple places. End of the day, they have to be accessed, right? I mean, end of the day, we have to view it. If it is a video, we have to listen to it. It's audio. If it is a data, either we need to see it, take a printout, or we need to make some modifications and things like that ultimately. So those things obviously will be, these are the kind of mediums where we access it, obviously through mobile phones or pads or laptops, desktops, and then obviously there are cloud storage. I mean, when we though we do not have a physical systems which we can see like our laptops and mobiles and all, but if you have any cloud instance, when you buy a cloud instance from any cloud vendor, through any kind of a remote access protocol or a client, you will be able to access that computing system. Ultimately, again, it'll, I mean, from there we'll be accessing the cloud storage and whatnot. And obviously, these are the pen drives and the CD-ROMs and all those things are the mediums where something which we can feel, touch and feel on a day-to-day basis. So this is the way how we do it. And then let us talk about the storage systems. I mean, what are the different type of, what is the purpose of those things? What are the different type of those things, and what are the different interfaces we use to access or connect to the end device where the data is being stored actually. So the purpose is obviously very simple. It is either it is a long term or a short term. Basically, we wanted to keep the data for a longer duration. Example, if it is a marriage CD, it is some events, photographs, or it is a data of a tax, some related one, or a customer related information, or phone bills, banking system data, all those things they wanted to keep it rather than keeping it in a books or any kind of a methodologies what we were using till today. If you go to a lot of government offices, they'll be using a lot of books. The problem with those kind of things is, I mean, when you keep it in a book, the problem is over the period, maybe the book may, suppose if any fire accident happens, the book may just go off, indirectly the data is gone. Our book, sometimes the data, the person, one person, the way how they have written, somebody else may not be able to read it. And it is easy to manipulate. Somebody can tamper the data. So many of those kind of problems are there. So that's why obviously we moved into a computing thing. And not only that, example, if we have a tons of information in a big, let us say, go to police station. Sometimes if you wanted to access, or if you wanted to see a newspaper of 20 years back, and you wanted to know what is there in the 20 years back newspaper in the third page, whatever it is I mean, the amount of time it takes to go back and find that specific newspaper or a file or whatever it is, and then again opening it and going there and trying to read it. And again, as we discussed about how some people will write it, and the clarity of the whole thing, because naturally over the period, these kind of things, I mean, even the text might have been disappeared sometimes. In fact, nowadays when you go to a shop and try to buy some groceries and get the bill, and within one day, the whatever is the bill, what you see it, the entire text will be completely gone. Because the kind of ink what they use, which they put it on a paper, uh, within a day or two, it automatically goes off. So obviously, we don't want all these problems. That's exactly where we moved into computing things, the faster access, large amount of data, and so that we can track the changes which are happening to the base data, and also able to transfer from one place to other place. That's very, very important. In the existing olden days, if you have to take that one data from one police station to another police station, or one bank to another bank, uh, whatever it is, it's not only the time consuming, expensive, and if it goes there, then it is not available here, whatnot, all those things. So the purpose is very simple. It's a long-term and non-volatile storage. That's exactly what it is. And it is a large, inexpensive. Yes, the cost is going to be little low when compared to the other mediums and mechanisms what we've been following. And then obviously, the kind of storage hierarchy, how we are going to keep it for a longer duration. So what are the different types? We already discussed about it. It's a magnetic storage like a disk and a floppy and tape. And then optical storages, which are again the next evolution of the storage types from the disks, floppies, and tapes to an optical storage. And then obviously the current one, which is called the electrical storage, where the flash memory, so that the size of the hardware device where the data is getting stored is not only small in size, but it is also able to store more data. Plus, more importantly, the retrieval of the data, the whole accessing, the speed dramatically increased. So that's how the whole innovation has happened, and that's how obviously over the period the costs also slowly decreased. Within electrical storage, there are multiple, again, so many things are there. One of the latest things what we're using, the SSD. Okay, if you look at this computer also, if you just look at this computer storage, if you go to the storage, you see it is a flash storage. You can clearly see it is a 1 terabyte of flash storage. So it's not that SSD or HDD, whatever it is, whatever you saw. So that's why if I open this laptop also, it comes within kind of a 5 to maximum 4 or 5 seconds. Whereas previously it used to take 10 to 15 or 30 seconds, sometimes minutes. So this is a different type of storage types, how it got evolved. And then what are the different interfaces we use to access the data? So there is a device, and there is a computing system and a device. To connect it, we use multiple things like IDE, SATA, SCSI, the small computing system interfaces, the USBs, obviously the cables, or we use fiber cables for much faster access. Obviously, all our internet lines today are through fiber channels. That's why we're able to get gigabytes of speed over the internet. Even our the whole evolution of this whole the mobile 2G and then 3G, 4G, 5G is also, it's not just the spectrum wide. At the end of the day, the spectrum, what it is going to help is the speed of the whole data transfer, and how much and how fast. So obviously in a physical connectivity, it's a fiber channels, and then previously we used to use a normal LAN cables and then USBs and whatnot. Again, depends on the length and depends on the distance and all those things. We are going to use multiple interfaces to access the data. So within the computer also, obviously, we will be using some of these interfaces to connect the hard disk to the computing power, to the next device. Okay. I hope you are able to follow through till now. As I explained, most of our sessions are a little theoretical, but that's why I don't want to keep it for 2 hours, where sometimes you fall in sleep, and most of these things you know it is there in your mind somewhere, but just we are trying to recollect it so that you are ready for the next practical sessions, especially when it comes to the forensics, because very important to understand these terms and terminologies in the forensic world. And not only that, when the tools and techniques we are going to use to do forensics, these kind of things which are going to definitely help you a lot when we know these things in a much more logical way, or when we refresh it. I don't want to call it as this session is something which you don't know, I call it as something which you definitely know, but it is we are just refreshing it by just allocating some time for it. So what are the different type of storage, data storage we have? We have a primary storage, we have a secondary, and we have a tertiary storage. So obviously, as the name suggests, the primary is something, just to explain that, the primary is something which is immediately available to the computing programs, which is kind of a main memory or a cache. Obviously, it's a quick in access, and it's less in data size in the primary, because in the primary storage it's a little expensive, as I previously mentioned. It's low, how much data it can store is low, but more importantly, the good thing is it's faster to, it's basically a copy of the data from the main secondary storage, so that or a tertiary storage which is there in somewhere else, in a SAN or a cloud, whatever it is. Sorry, an optical storage. So primary storage is all about typically it's your RAM. I mean, the read-only memory, where it gets stored, where it get extracted from your SSD or hard disk to the RAM, faster access and all those things. The secondary is exactly the one what we just talk about. It's a hard disk or a SSD and what all those things. And I mean, the good thing is, suppose if you switch off the computer, the power goes off, whatever memory, whatever the data is there in the primary storage in the RAM, it goes off. I mean, there's no way we can keep it or access it. I mean, though there are multiple forensic ways we can try to bring certain amount of thing, but most of the times the data in the RAM is completely gets wiped out. I mean, that's how it works all about. But in the secondary storage, it is actually the data is going to be there permanently. And not only that, it is going to keep the multiple snapshots of the data based on the operating system and based on the multiple settings in the computer. You are not only going to see the current version of the file, but also some of the modification of the data what you are seeing. Suppose if it's a document, many times the Windows Office and the operating system, Windows operating system or different type of operating systems, they keep based on multiple other settings also, multiple versions of the data also gets available. That's why when you go and type something in the browser, when you open the file, when you connect your USB drive, so a lot of these things get stored in the computer for a very, very long duration. All those things are kept for multiple purposes. Technically, it is being used for one reason, but obviously for a forensic reasons also. Actually, in your entire forensic course, you are going to go through this whole process of what are the different techniques and mechanisms you can use to extract those information which is not directly available or evidently available to the normal user. It may be registry, it may be temporary cache, and there are multiple mechanisms which anyways you are going to go through it. And we're going to use multiple techniques and tools for to get that data in a meaningful way. Anyways, that's the secondary storage, and the tertiary storage is all about like the tapes and which are actually disconnected from the main computing and then been kept it away, so that if any natural calamities happens or if anything goes drastically bad, so that you will be able to bring those things back and again connect it to the main thing and again bring that data back or copy the data back into the secondary storage, and obviously the primary storage, which is anyways your computer, which you will do whatever you want. So that's the three hierarchical ways we can think of the storages. And again, the storage system types, I mean, the direct access system, the DAS and single drives and SCSI and NAS, and we will be primarily going to focus on DAS and NAS because I mean, rest of the things are also there, but it's not that heavily been, we did not know about those things that much. Even in the forensic world, it is good to know, obviously in the forensic world also, so that because when a case comes or when anybody gets involved in the forensic directly or indirectly, so it is better to understand where exactly the data gets stored, how it travels, and where the bits and pieces of the critical components of the data get stored, and how long they stored and what kind of data they store, so that you can logically connect them to prove a case or create a case or whatever it is. So we don't know what is the intention of the whole process we're going to do, but the plan is understand all those things. Okay, so till now we discussed about different type of storages what we have on different type of levels, how the data gets stored, accessed, and then we talked about uh, the whole hardware and different components of software, how they basically interact with these things, and very simple basics of what is the volatility. I mean, where exactly the temporary data will be there, where is the permanent data will be there, where is the, I mean, disconnected devices like tapes and all, where it is a much more permanent data will be there, so that it is not directly can be accessible unless it has been attached to a computing device. Okay, now we come into a computer. When it comes to the computing device, it's a phone, it may be a tab, or it may be a cloud instance of an operating system, or your laptop or desktop, whatever it is. So, I mean, we'll talk a little bit about how the data get transmitted within the computer, and what are the different type of logical layers we can put it, and discuss a little bit about it, because these are the things which you will be primarily, some of the words what are being described here will be used during your forensic course, or during the forensic tools you are going to see it in your upcoming sessions during this week. So there is a computing system. So obviously it's an operating system is there, and then we have a different type of hardware and logical layers are there: CPU, memory, bus, and then input, output, RAID controls, and disk drives. So this is an example of a traditional internal how data gets stored, and how it gets retrieved, or back and forth the data gets transmitted. So we'll just talk a little bit about that. So let us say there is a data, I mean, small chunk of a data structure is there, a piece of information is there, and the way how, suppose when I type it on my application and all those things through a program, it may be a browser, it may be a Word document, it may be a notepad, anything, that the way how basically from that my computing application to it goes through the layers from top to bottom, and ultimately gets stored on the disk by the application through a program, the way how it has been written. I mean, so obviously there are a lot of hardware components and a lot of operating system level, and what is the application. So all those things internally work through multiple APIs and multiple things, how they've been work in a logical way. So obviously the data will go from here, and then obviously how it goes here, it will be going through a keyboard or a mouse, or through some external entities where it is being attached to, either through hardware, through your USBs, or maybe Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, because there are multiple ways how the data can be captured, right? Your camera, your mic, the audio, voice can be extracted or get through your mics or USB devices, or your, the primary base is keyboard and mouse, obviously. So these things will feed the data into the system, data into the application, and then it goes through the CPU, memory bus, and then the IO controls, and then ultimately go and sit on the disk. So it's a very simple logical way. I mean, there is an input devices, there is a computer, there is an application, and then ultimately it goes back to the system level where it gets stored on the disk. So it's as simple as that. Okay, and again, it just been explained in terms of how IO RAID control. Suppose if your disk, I mean, we're going to talk about a little bit on the RAID and all those things, the redundant accesses of this data, how exactly these multiple disks will be there, and how they've been used, and what is the purpose of this different type of RAID 01 and all the different type of RAIDs are there. And we'll talk a little bit about those things. But ultimately, again, the data is just going through the way how we just talked about it logically. Okay. So again, I mean, what are the different type of, how the technology is getting evolved in this entire storage system. So apart from the technologies discussed so far, there are huge amount of developments are happening. Again, how much data we can store. In fact, there is a huge amount of R&D is going on by Microsoft and Google, and multiple, because at the end of the day, Today, if you look at the amount of data which is getting, flowing through multiple systems is enormous. If you look at the amount of data which is getting pumped into the YouTube or any OTT platforms or typical social media platforms or chatting platforms, it is unbelievable. The data increased and the size of the data is increased. Obviously, the quality of the whole video and audio what we see is completely increased. That's why there's not only the size of the data is increased, and the amount of people who are feeding into this data is increased, and many times the same type of the data is being copied multiple times, replicated multiple times in the cloud or in their own disks or in multiple places. So obviously we need a better system for not only for a day-to-day things, for a fallback mechanisms, but also this whole computing, the data storage has to be ready for the upcoming generations or the upcoming needs, especially because we are moving completely into a digital economy, and the entire education, hospital and pharma and entire manufacturing. A lot of these things are completely moving towards the digitalized thing. It means that obviously there's a computing is important, but also the storage is also important. So they're just trying to find out and evolve how they can even store the data in the air itself in multiple ways. There are some crazy developments are happening. When I was in US last year, they were talking about a lot of things which we can't even visualize. So how they are exploring ways and means to find newer mechanisms and newer ways to store more data, or kind of an unlimited data storages in a smaller space, because that is very important. And there are so many words have been written here. You can just go ahead and Google it and find more about it. And obviously we'll be sharing this small slide. Obviously most of this data extracted through books and internet and multiple places, just kept it in a little logical way. That's it. So that kind of today, whatever I'm going to spend a little bit time on what we discussed so far, and I'm going to set the stage for our today's later session. And I'm going to actually in another 10-15 minutes we may try to end this session, but logically through this. But however, I'm going to give you a couple of links to you. Two or three of them are YouTube links, and a couple of them are the blogs and the information which are written from the main sources on the storage system. I highly recommend please go through those 7-8 minutes of video, because some of them it is very good when you see it logically, through a pictorial view. It will stuck in your mind for a larger duration of the time on the same topics what we discussed so far. I'm going to post those links in the chat right now. And so though we are going to end the session before 12 o'clock, I highly recommend to spend that at least 30 to 40 minutes on viewing those videos, going through those blogs, and the information what I'm going to share through the links, at least, minimum. Obviously, you can do more and more research apart from the links what I'm going to share, the topics what we are discussing. It is always going to be useful to you. So first, let me just quickly share those links, and then we will come back. Let me just okay, so there is a place here to chart, and I'm going to do everyone, and I'm going to sorry, it is not copied. I think let me copy it. Yeah, meanwhile, if you have any questions, please go ahead and ask. We're going to just look at one or two of the slides. I pasted the links. Please confirm me if you get it. I hope you got it, because I sent this to everyone. Yeah. So there is a topic here, and then there is a link here, and then there is a topic here. There is a link here. Obviously, on IEEE, there are some links I kept it, because they are the ones who create the standards how the storage systems have. Otherwise, everybody creates their own type of storage devices, then those will be extremely difficult for everybody to access all those things. Okay, I mean use it. So please go through those links. And before that, we also wanted to just look at two of the images, how this whole logically these storage systems are there. So if you look at the topmost is the where the highest amount of the data can be stored, like a SAN and the internal SCSI, FC and SCOE kind of formats we use. And then there is a network access storage again, and then those we access through different protocols like NFS, SMB and whatnot. I mean, there are multiple ways are there. And then there are different ways of accessing the data, especially if you're into web applications or a SaaS based applications, between the one web application to another application, or one web application to a database, um, or from one entity to another entity, we use something called an especially when the data is going as an object. So typically, I'm sure most of you might have heard about objects like JSON, XML. So this is those are these are some structured data which we exchange over the internet through something called RESTful services. We call it as APIs, right? Application Programmable Interfaces. Again, it's a program language you write. We are going to give some input and to the some database or a program, and ultimately that data, whatever inputs you give, based on that, it is going to talk to the database or some other API and extract the data and again send it back. And when it is sending it, it sends in a format of JSON or XML, whatever it is. So usually we use JSON nowadays because that is heavily acceptable format. It is easy to read and dissect and transmit also, obviously. That's why we use JSON. So these are different type of formats of these different type of ways how we store the data or access. And then the requests are clearly mentioned here. I mean, I talked about the protocols, and it may be through the different techniques and technologies. And then there is a unified controller, and then within these things, again, the data is going to be accessed through a block request where the bits and pieces of information, like we talk about 1 byte and 8 bytes and 16 bytes, whatnot. So when a packet is getting structured in an IP layer, I mean, ultimately it's a TCP, UDP, whatever number of hundreds of protocols are there. When those protocols ultimately get merged into the IP layer, the IP packet, you can go to the YouTube and search about all these protocols. What is each protocol, why they created the protocol like that, what is the purpose of this protocol, and then what is the IP packet, and ultimately that IP packet is what actually gets transmitted over the internet from one system to other system or one place to another place through different means and ways. So just to understand how these things are there. And again, it is a little bit of more thing, but it's within the computing system. We just mentioned about, I mean, this is exactly what we saw the last example of how the data is getting transmitted in the system through the inputs. It is going through the CPU and the memory, and then ultimately back to the main storage system. So, I mean, my recommendation is please go through those links, what I just shared, because they will take approximately 30 to 35 to 40 minutes at max. It gives you a logical understanding. I know it's going to be boring for you, but I'm telling you, if you just touch upon these things once with little interest, because without understanding these things, though they look simple and similar, I mean, easy and looks like I know it kind of stuff, or I don't need to know you. You may not be using all these words and all those things on a day-to-day basis, but it's important for you to know these things. Again, re-emphasizing to understand your upcoming sessions. So that's the only reason I'm emphasizing again and again on these things. Please get yourself familiarized on these things, whatever we discussed so far. So this is what kind of I thought of just sharing with you in the first initial theory session. And obviously we can do a little bit of more commands and try to be as much interactive as possible in our upcoming sessions. But at this moment, if you have any questions on the topic what we covered on the basics of the file system and storage, please either mention it in the chat or I mean you can speak also by unmuting your microphone. So I'm happy to answer. Any questions from participants? Okay, somebody is asking that to explain the
Last slide.
so you are asking about last slide means the one which I just showed you the image or this one?
Yes, sir, this one.
Yeah. No, this is more of if you see this slide, the different things which are talking about here is end of the day the input output complex systems. The how the input I talked about the SESI and fiber channels and all those things which ultimately connect back to the main storage systems. So they just mentioned like fiber cables, SCSI modules, it may be wired things, and then again they talked about the CPU, memory, modules, multi-core processors and whatnot, and how they generally diagrammatically how basically they are being showing, and both sides is same exactly. And then they talked about the different high performance flash devices. So if you whatever you see here like a database icon, ultimately these are the storage hardware storage systems, and then that little bit of drives or flash drives, whatnot. They just obviously there's a power system supply and all those things, and also there are multiple things which are being used to cool the whole thing because when the data is there, when it is when there are multiple ways to access the data, when that thing is transmitting within the hard disk to access the data, the hard disk gets heated, and obviously you need to maintain uh, the temperature of the hard disk also should be not go beyond certain thing. Otherwise, it get corrupted, and the whole system can go for a toss. Because there's so much of revolutions are happening uh, within the hard disk to access data continuously by multiple applications, programs. So there is also going to be a cooling effect has to happen either through external air conditioner or within the fans and all those things. I mean, it's just a way how at a very high level, whatever is happening within your laptop, they just showed it a little bit of more diagrammatically, nothing else. Okay, so
Sir, excuse me, sir.
yes, please.
Sir,
Yes, please welcome.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you after that. Can you please repeat? Hello?
Sir,
Hello?
one question from Vasudev Shahapur. Sir, I wanted to know about the security of data.
Okay, so see, security of data is again a completely different topic, but anyways, let us discuss logically a little bit about it. So till now, what we discussed is how the data is stored and what is the different type of devices which are involved or components which are involved in the entire flow of the data, either at manipulations. And now, if you talk about security, there are multiple layers of security in this thing now. We call typically there are three words we call something called data at rest, where the data is going and sitting on the end hardware device even if it is in the database, it may be Oracle database or MySQL database or Postgres, whatever it is. Ultimately, that database is a logical layer again on top of the hard disk. So we call it as what is the security? We talk about data at rest. Let us talk about that. So, and then data in motion. That's the next one when the data is getting extracted from the final storage system to the computing system. So it's called data in motion. And the last thing we call it out, call something as data while processing. Processing means when the application is basically processing the data for some kind of a operations or edit operations or to send it to something else, maybe all the stuff. So let us talk about these three layers now. Uh, when we talk about data at rest, so the simple important thing what we need to understand is always we what we want is the data when it is in the rest, it is being governed and controlled by primarily through something like,
Event one, social media ಹೋಗ್ತದೆ.
sorry, you are saying something? Okay, so when it is in data and the rest, the only security we typically focus is the data should not be directly stored without encryption, because when it is encrypted, even if the data disk has been stolen by somebody, let us say you kept a sensitive data on your pen drive or a hard disk. If the data is hard disk is been lost, let us say your computer is lost or somebody stolen it, or a pen drive is lost, somebody got it, that somebody should not, when they connect it to their computing system, this should not be directly accessible. It should be in an encrypted format. Or I mean, what happens is, encrypted means when you look at the data, it's not password protected. Password protected, those things are again a little different. When I talk about encryption means, that's why nowadays Windows operating system and Mac or Linux, all those things allow you to encrypt your data on the final disk. They actually decrypt it through the key when you are booting the operating system. It means even if you lose your laptop, even somebody removes the hard disk and connect it to somebody else, some other operating system, they will not be able to access the data how we were able to see it in the olden days. The entire hard disk is actually, and the entire data is encrypted. So that's why when the data in the rest, it's always the best way to secure is through encryption. And again, in encryption, we have multiple ways, type of algorithms we can use to encrypt, again, because each algorithm defines how difficult it is to crack or basically convert into the plain text or a human readable format or whatever it is to the original format. But again, the more complexity you are going to involve in the encryption, again, there is going to be you are going to add more delay in the processing, because obviously it takes more time to decrypt and encrypt kind of stuff. Okay, so encryption is the only way to secure the data when it is in the rest. That's why if you look at the upcoming WhatsApp, also they're talking about today, one of the biggest problem is when you are using channels like WhatsApp or email systems. So the data at rest, example in WhatsApp, when you keep a backup on your Google Drive or OneDrive or wherever it is, actually the backup is always an unencrypted data. So that's why if somebody hacks your Google Drive, somebody gets access to your OneDrive, that anybody can actually will be able to see the data. That's why now they're coming up with a completely end-to-end encryption, where even the data which is going to be stored on the Google Drive or on your other whatever online file storage types, they're going to encrypt it. So encryption is the only way to secure the data when it is in the rest. So now let us talk about on the fly. We call it as data in motion. That's the second thing, right? Data at rest, data in motion. Data in motion, typically, I mean, I'm sure you all knows about that. Typically, data in motion is through web browsers, because that's where it may be YouTube, it may be web browser, it may be email, whatnot. I mean, that's how exactly we use from one place to other place. We use different protocols, different applications for it, whatnot. But at the end of the day, when it is moving from the final endpoint data where it is stored to the application, whether it is a browser or a notepad or a document or a video player like YouTube, online player or a offline player, whatever it is, end of the day, in that place we use SSL is one of the typically used protocol, the secure socket layer, where why this is important is when the data is coming from the rest to the final computing power, we don't want somebody in between to do man in the middle attack or spoofing attacks because your data is transmitting through multiple people, multiple channels. If it is a broadband, if it is coming from US to my house in Hyderabad, it is touching upon multiple points to come from there to here. So if somebody is spoofing the data in between, either at my Wi-Fi, let us say I have a Wi-Fi router here. If somebody connects to the same Wi-Fi and they do a lot of techniques like ARP spoofing, man in the middle attack and whatnot, so they should not be able to see the data in plain text. That's why nowadays every website is HTTPS. When it is S, obviously there is going to be public private and algorithm which is going to be used. We are going to exchange the data only through an encryption way, so that nobody can see it in between in a plain text. So obviously data in motion is always we use protocols like SSL, and there are many other ways. I mean, if you're going to use, you're going to connect from one network to other network, we use VPN, virtual private networks. Again, virtual private network is again internally SSL driven, and there is going to be a private channel is going to be established from one your network to the final network, and whatever data is going to exchange, it may be telnet, you are going to do a SSH, or you are going to access some files, maybe RDP sessions, so everything is encrypted now. That's again. So now in the final thing is called when data is in processing. When data is in processing, this is where the big trick part is. It is kind of not that easy to keep the data still secure when it is data in the final operation stage. It is in the RAM, or when it is in the application memory. It is very, very difficult. That's why even till today, your passwords, maybe I'll try to show it maybe in tomorrow's session sometime if possible, how we can extract the passwords in Windows operating systems in plain text. If you have time, please go and type it, called something called Mimikatz. Mimikatz is a program written by somebody. I mean, there are so many community edition it is. You can easily extract the passwords of your Windows operating system or any Windows based authentication mechanisms they are going to use. We can easily see the plain text passwords because it's impossible to keep them encrypted. In LSAS process, there are too many things, a lot of things we can go and talk, but let us not go deep into it. But however, there are companies like, I know one startup in Bangalore, Zero Labs, it's called Zero Labs, Z. They're also trying to support how even the data, when it is getting processed, also it is not plain text. It is a little tricky when it is not plain text, how exactly they can do computing, how they can do conditions match, how they can compare something and all those stuff. But that's the trick part all about. They're trying to solve the whole thing, and they have some demos came up with, and that's going to be the next evolution, so that even in the memory, it is not going to be in plain text. Even somebody hacks your system, even they have access to your mobile phone at a root level, system level, still they will not be able to access the data of the application's memory. Because today it is plain text, most of the applications. That's why if somebody installs a malware in your phone or a laptop, they'll be able to take the keystrokes, they'll be able to take look at the memory data or the temporary data which is getting stored for the applications and all those things. But again, to summarize the whole thing, there are three ways we need to understand data storage: data at rest, data in motion, data in manipulation or processing, whatever it is. So that's what little bit. Is this fine? I mean, you got some understanding on that? So there is a question which is written by Mr. V. Ravi. What are the challenges?
Ravi is having one question, sir. What challenges we face when applying forensic on SSD hard disk when compared to SATA hard disk?
Yeah, actually, I think this is. I think there are some demos planned, anyways. Exactly, this is where you see. End of the day, when you're doing a forensics, on obviously SSDs are very fast and also large in. I mean, not large, I can say, but most of the SSDs we are using today in our laptops, especially all Apple laptops, try to come with SSDs. Even Windows laptops, whether it is a Lenovo, HP, whatnot. Dell, all those things coming up with SSD. In technically, there is not too much of difference you see when you, because ultimately you're going to do forensic analysis through some kind of an application, either the applications which are given freely in a Kali Linux toolbox, or some commercial versions which you are going to experience it in your upcoming practical sessions. I mean, that's where you are going to see some of the tools, how, I mean, there are some GUI tools which are some web application tools, some free tools they're going to introduce to you. Like I think Subramanian, somebody is going to talk about those things, and you are going to look at it. But as such, there is not going to be too much differences when it the type of storage system, especially in SSD and SATA. There is not that much difference. You are going to face it. But there are challenges you are going to face, are limitations and challenges, are to prove it legally. A lot of differences are going to be there based on the data from where you are going to access the whether it is the data is actually non-tampered from the original state, and a lot of those kind of other things are going to come up, which I think they'll be discussing for sure. But yeah. Good. I hope, I think we got some reasonable understanding today in terms of what are the file systems, what are the different type of storage systems, and a little bit, I think, whatever question we asked about security on the data part. So there's one more question: if security is too stronger, is it challenging to perform? Yes, obviously it is a challenging going to be, especially that's exactly where the problem today. And again, there are companies in Israel and US and in many places. That's why it's expensive tools, right? Even the government is facing a lot of challenges. When a phone is being, especially when you get an iPhone or when you get even Android phone, uh, when it is been encrypted, when it is been secured through your fingerprint or whatever pattern, whatever it is, the entire phone is encrypted. So it's not that you're going to connect your phone to some other operating system and then trying to access through an application. You are going to get everything just like that. Those are definitely there are going to be challenges when the data is in the rest is in encrypted way. When even when you get a live system, that's why it's very important for you to understand, because when you understand those things, now it's when the system is shut down, it is going to be everything encrypted. So when people go to police, people go to the live case, if the system is on, typically they don't switch off. They only remove the data cables. They don't even remove the power cables, because the moment they remove the power cable, again, the entire volatility data will go off, and an entire a lot of data you are going to lose. A lot of sensitive data you are going to lose, which will be crucial for you in the forensic purpose. That's why it is important for you to understand which data is going to be where, and how much and how long the data is going to be stored in that specific location, either in the RAM, CPUs, or in the lot of cache and lot of registries and operating system. When the operating system is live, how much data is going to be there? When the browser is on, how much data is going to be there? Or when it is, when you whatever operations you are doing, which data is going to be stored for how long, and who is going to store it, whether Google is going to store what, or whether it is the particular application. Example, when I have a when I'm logging into my Gmail, when I'm logging into my Office 365, lot of my when I'm logging in, when I'm logging off, from where I'm logging in, what IP address I'm using, what operating system, what browser, how much time I'm live, a lot of those things, applications are going to keep the audit logs, and a lot of systems in between, firewalls, whatever comes in between, a lot of software related and hardware related components which comes in between the data transmission, they also going to keep some traces. So all these things are important for us to understand which are channels they are touching, and what is going to store what, and how long, and in what format, and all those things. Yes, there are challenges. That's whole forensics is all about um, understanding all basics and knowing the tools and creating a copy of the original one at as it is stage, and then do all your whatever forensic investigations on the copied version. And you are also going to learn about how to create the checksum of the original copy, so that whatever proofs you are going to extract out of the cloned copy, and the hash of that cloned copy also exactly same as the original one. It may be a file or a directory or a hard disk or a volatile RAM or whatever it is. So there are going to be hashes, there are going to be a lot of things. Yes, there are going to be challenges, and I think that's what you are going to learn, and you're going to see it. It's a big subject, I mean, forensics itself, because again, the purpose of forensics also multifold, right? Whether it is from a judicial purpose within the police system or court, or within the employee organization, or proving it to somebody. What is the purpose of doing forensics? Or sometimes you just yourself wanted to retrieve something. Maybe by mistake you deleted something, you wanted to retrieve it back. So a lot of forensic techniques you can use to retrieve your own data back, because typically in any operating system, when you delete something, actually it don't get deleted. Only the link between the final inode and the basically the inode which contains the folder name or a file name, only those will be erased. Otherwise, the data is going to be intact. So it's very easy to extract those things back unless it is the main data gets overridden by the new data. So you will be knowing all those things over the period. Yes, it is not going to be straightforward. Yes, challenges will be there, but the more you know, the more experiments you do, more how the applications and technologies are getting evolved, the more challenges will come when it especially come to the serverless architectures. Because nowadays, even in the cloud, whatever we can take database as a service today, right? Like example, Mongo Atlas. Mongo Atlas is a completely database as a service. You have no idea where the database is physically residing in the cloud vendor side. I mean, those kind of things are going to be much more extremely difficult. Yeah, but that's out. I mean, sometimes a lot of compliances will come into picture, country wise, business wise. Some people don't give some data. They don't share some data unless it is going to be a national wide security issue, and they have their own ways and means why they don't share the data, whatnot. I mean, because there is a privacy comes into the picture from an individual perspective, they don't want to share. But from a security perspective, they always want to have access data. But again, when like the previous session we discussed about the ethics of the whole thing, right? I mean, all these things comes into the picture. But yeah, it is stronger, and especially the password protected things. Everything is created for some reason, at some reason, and for all other things, we have to follow different ways and means, and it is going to consume some time. That's why I think if you ever get a chance, I think, I don't know whether Venkatesh Murthy mentioned to you or not during his talk. Actually, Venkatesh Murthy and entire police department in Karnataka, they built a huge, expensive forensic laboratory in a cybercrime police station there in DSA. DSCA has their own cyber lab there. I think I recommend you to visit that office and look at all the different type of tools which they bought, which are extremely expensive. I think some of the tools you are going to see in your upcoming sessions. I think day 3, 4, 5, you are going to experience some of those software applications. They're going to show it to you, because sometimes the software comes along with the hardware bundle itself. Some of them you have to buy the software separately. Any other questions? I mean, if you're not satisfied with the answer, even for the existing questions, please do ask the specific area where you're not clarified. Either I can answer you. If I don't know, at least I can tell you where you can go back and do more research on that. Okay, thank you.
Sir,
Yeah, please.
sir, I just want a little more clarification regarding difference between memory and storage.
See, memory is, I think, as we just mentioned, right? Memory is something which is a volatile memory, where basically it's a temporary base. Example, your RAM, right, is a memory. The RAM is always acts in between your program and the storage. Storage is something which is memory is, I mean, the storage is like a hard disk where the actual file data is going to store. And then the memory is something which your application basically takes a copy of the data, whatever is required. Example, if you open a 100 MB file, sometimes it's Notepad or WordPad, whatever application you use. Every application has a mechanism to extract the main data from the main source, how much they wanted to take it, how much they want to keep it in the cache, in the disk again, and then also in the memory. Because memory space is very limited, and memory space you can only access through the program. Like these data structures you create, right? Whether you use C programming, Java programming, whatever program, ultimately you write programs through applications through programs, right? And every program has a data structures, and the limitations are there. How much data you can take, how much data you can access, because end of the day, so the memory is a temporary based data place, or it's a copy of the original space, or intermediary information which eventually can go back and store in the main or override the main storage. If through application, if you go and save something, if I open a data file and do some modifications, if I don't say save, it won't go and override. It is still in the memory only. It is still in the RAM only. It's not still gone to that level. But however, the copy of that is going to be there in the cache and all those things. I mean, you will be, that's why I talked about different versions of the file, different intermediary modifications also stored in a different place, not on the main file. And that is again going to be on the disk, but the real temporary storage will be on the RAM itself, which is we refer it as a memory. That's it.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Again, it's about how you open the data. Example, if you open a video file, like let us say you have MP3 or MP4, you are opening it through a VLC player. You open it only in a read-only mode, because the application is allowing you to open in read-only mode. But it again depends on the application. The data you can always access through an application. Again, from the security perspective, what application you are opening with what user privileges, and what are the privileges operating system is allowing you to control or emphasizing on the data which is stored. So that's where the user privileges will come into the picture. The file level permissions, we call it as a permissions level at a local system or Active Directory, whatnot. But again, it was a little bit of an additional layer of permissions, whether you can do it only. I mean, example, if I open this file, right? Like, let us look at. Let us take okay, CT Core. CT Core. If you see here, this file, I mean, I hope you know this RWX, read only, write, and executable. And actually, it has three more here, which are empty because they are ultimately this is for the user, and this is for the group, and this is for the rest of the world permissions. Suppose if I say now ch change owner, sorry, change chmod, let us say if I do 744 to CT Core, what does it mean is for the user who is the owner of this CT Core, which is Chandra, give full permissions, which is R is 4, W is 2, X is 1. That's why totally combined 7. And for the group, which is the staff is the group, give read only permission. And for the rest of the world, anybody, give 4. So if I do that, now if I do this, you can see for the others it came R, and rest of the world also it came R. And again, if I just go ahead and do this thing, you will see that everything it became change. But again, these are one more layer like that. We talked about encryption, and then these are the user level privileges based on the owner of the file, group of the file or a folder. They can be enforced from the operating system, or if you are a part of the Active Directory where it is also your computer is part of an organization through a Active Directory, then Active Directory also will come into the picture. But again, I mean, that's a completely different subject, but just to give a little bit on that, that's the thing. Any questions?
We welcome participants to participate actively and interactively. So Chandrasekhar Reddy is a very well-known forensic specialist, and he can and also hard worker, and he has done many research and startups. So definitely he will be here with us to answer all your queries and also to enlighten you on the basic fundamentals of storage system architecture. Sir, the session is going very nicely, starting from the basic concepts. This is actually what we need, our faculty members need. And distinguishing faculty members, totally 175 faculty members from recognized AICT institutions have been participated, and some army personnel, Lieutenant Colonel Agnivesh Pandey is also participated with in this workshop, and also the director of NIELT is also participated here, and the CID department, 2 personnel from West Bengal, they are also participating in this workshop, sir. So, and also most of the faculty members joined this workshop for the reason that the book Brian Carrier, that storage system, file system forensic analysis. So from this workshop, they get fetch the knowledge, and probably they are going to design the curriculum and from that book, and they can, I think that they will start offering that course as an elective, and that will be one of the objectives, sir. So it is very nicely it is going on, sir. So we are welcome this way of presentation, sir.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, I mean, though I'm, yeah, I think somebody's asking a question. Please go ahead.
The participants, if you have any questions, any other, you can please interact with our resource persons, please. Sir, the session is actually from 11 to 1 and then from 3 to 5, sir. So
Correct.
AICT in its scheme document has changed the time schedule for 2 hours one session they have made, sir.
No, this is really good. So that's
Yes.
why what I've done is, sir, actually I thought of ending the session before 12 so that participants get time to go through the videos and the blogs I have given.
Sir. That is correct, sir. That is correct.
There is no end for this kind of topics which we can
There is no
discuss.
end, never end.
So I think I wanted to encourage people to Google it and go through some information because especially when they're designing these courses also, though the fundamentals will not change when they design the whole course, but I highly encourage people to design the courses with more practical content, what is applicable as of today's techniques and technologies and the way how things are happening, and more importantly, how things are going to happen in next 5 years, because we need to cover those things like IoT and a lot of the electrical cars which
Yes,
are
sir.
going home automation, and a lot of biometric devices we are going to use within the human body to control sugars, monitor a lot of systems, because the computing things are not just getting only to the things what we are discussing today, but they're also going beyond into the farmers, into the healthcare, into the human body, and then cars, home automations, IoTs, and then drones. I mean, there's so many things
Yes,
are going
sir.
to come up. Every of these things, end of the day, they are processing data, they are collecting data, they are transmitting the data, they're doing so many things. So obviously, though I'm not sure how much forensics we will be covering in this thing, but please keep in mind in all these things also what we just discussed. You can Google it. There are very good research papers on each of these respective things, so that it will be good when you design a course. It will be actually covering in full.
Sir, 2 more questions from the participants.
Yeah.
Paul Joseph, how to overcome disk anti-forensic techniques like encryption and BitLocker, etc. Is there any way to identify which files in the storage systems are encrypted and a way to identify the information in those files?
So the basically BitLocker is again is now part of the Windows operating system from Windows, some part of Windows 7, but Windows 10 onwards they made it as a default one. BitLocker is a technique we use to at a disk level itself. So there are multiple ways of encryptions, right? One is at individual data within the file. A part of the information within the data can be encrypted, or the entire file can be encrypted, or again, entire folder can be encrypted, or entire partition can be encrypted, or entire disk can be encrypted. BitLocker comes into the picture when somebody chooses to encrypt the entire disk, especially in an offline state. Because when the system is in an on state, BitLocker doesn't come into picture, because it is only going to come into the picture when the system is getting switched on. Suppose if the system is off, and if there is a data something which you wanted to retrieve on that system which is BitLocker enabled, by and large it is difficult, but yes, there are some tools which are going to help you to bypass those things. Again, you can ask me, oh, if there's some tool which is going to bypass it, then what is the point of the BitLocker? Yes, it is not going to be simple, it is going to be difficult, but the tool is going to enable you the brute force mechanism, and sometimes some of these tools uses some bypass mechanisms. If the BitLocker, whatever the way it is being enabled, if it is not to the toughest level, yes, there are ways and means to bypass it through the expensive softwares which are only given to the government officials, especially um, uh, at a level where they are authorized to use those kind of tools. So those are definitely possible, but it is for normal people, it is not possible to bypass those things. So obviously, once you bypass the BitLocker, obviously you are going to see the disk as it is. But if there are again people uses the encryption at a file level, folder level, or within the file level, password level, or within the file you open also, it is not directly stored there, because they are using again some kind of a encrypted way the data is being kept in the file. I mean, there are so many ways to figure out. There are so many ways to crack the passwords which are kept for the files. Let us say document or a Excel file or some file which is password protected. Yes, there are again brute force mechanisms, cloud-based brute force which will be processing trillions of operations in seconds or minutes to crack it, or some of them are easy to bypass because of the specific tools which are designed by uh, multiple companies, some Israeli based, US based, but only given to police officials, government officials, when it is required. But it's not going to be straightforward. That's the whole point, right? I mean, there is, but obviously, how do we know whether some information is encrypted or not? If you open a image, sometimes it looks like image, but there's going to be data. I think those examples are going to be covered through, I think, Subramanian in your upcoming sessions. He's going to say whether it is actually data file, whether it is only image file, whether it is only audio file, or there is some additional information which is stored in that space. So there are tools and techniques which we can use, which even a lot of people are using to send a lot of sensitive data through audio files, video files, multiple ways. Even we are seeing movies, people use multiple ways to uh, tell their secrets in the newspaper. You read the first character in the first page, second character in the second page or article. I mean, that's where the techniques and tools, I mean, examples comes into picture. So how to identify files which are encrypted? See, typically what is encryption? Example, there are two ways to identify whether file is encrypted or not. Typically, example, if you see here, if I create a file called 1.txt, so I keep like this. Okay, so I say I save this file. So I say 1.txt. So typically, this 1.txt files are the ASCII files. I can open through Notepad or VI or Nano, whatever. There are multiple applications that open. So, but extension is something which I have given. Even if I move this extension, move 1.txt to 1.mp4. Actually, the data is not changed. Only the extension is changed. So if I open through the application, the VI editor is going to open the data and read each chunk by chunk based on the way how it is being programmed. Just because I change the extension, nothing is going to change. Extension is only a way to attach the default applications to open the file. By default, if it is MP4, we might have kept an application for all MP4, MPEG, blah, 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 AVI files. VLC player or some player has to open it. It is just only to which application to be used by default for which type of extensions. That's it. Otherwise, you can right click and open with always a different thing. So extensions are only, I mean, I hope you understand the extensions are only for that meaning, nothing else. And in Windows, how which extension is being kept to which default application, you can easily go and check it out. But however, to know, even if I change the application, if I say file, there is a, I mean, in Linux and we use something called file command. It actually tells, doesn't matter what is the application. I mean, what is it is, it actually tells what is the type. It says it's an ASCII file. Suppose if I say, let us say if I open this PEM file, if I ask it, it is saying it's RSA private key. It understands the MIME type, it reads the structure of the file, how the data is being stored, and tells which type of file. So this is one way to use. In the forensic tools also, they use the similar version of the file command. It has a lot of graphical tools are available. They open up and tell what it is. The same way, how we know the type of the file based on the format of the data, the data based on the data how it is being there, they also tell which type of encryption it is, whether it is encrypted or not. If it is encrypted, whether it is encrypted to what, base 64 or RSA, or in RSA what it is. I mean, it will be able to identify based on the way, because each encryption has certain format, certain length, all those things. So there are tools, variety of tools which are available in, if you take a SANS REM course, reverse engineering course, they actually give a CD. The CD also you can download it, GREM CD from the SANS website. Or if you go to Kali Linux box, there's a number of tools which are available to find the type of the file, whether the file is encrypted or not. If it is encrypted, what encryption is being used, and then to decrypt and all those things. A lot of cracker tools, bypassing tools, and multiple other ways are there. Do we have any open source toolkit available? Yes, I told, right? SANS has one, and Kali has a lot of tools available with it. And like that, there are two, three other are giving it.
Does magic sir, one more question. Does magic numbers helpful in forensic investigation? This question is from Dr. Paul Joseph.
Yes. Magic numbers again. See, like the MIME type we talked about it, yes, they will help in type understanding the type and the encryption mechanisms and the storage and whatnot. I mean, yes, all those things are going to be helpful during your forensic to find out the right tool, whether it is a commercial tool or a free tool, or sometimes you can do it yourself. So yes, all these basics are going to helpful to ultimately, because the tools and techniques are not going to change. What changes is which tool to use and which combination of the tools to use to achieve the purpose of our entire assignment, so that we can reduce the time and come out with a meaningful output. That's what it is all about.
Sir, recently, it's not recent. In fact, since last 3 years, I have heard this particular mobile phone, Cryptophone 500i, that is German make. The Cryptophone 500i is a point-to-point communications. As long as the two parties in conversation, so it is going on. After once the phones are hooked off, the storage, the data that is stored in both the phones will be vanished.
Exactly.
So how to carry out forensics of such cryptophones?
Not possible. That's exact. See, this is a fight happening even within our own mobile applications also. So with your own mobiles also, a lot of people don't want to. Obviously, people understood now. Two things, right? When it comes to the normal conversations, I am talking something to my family members or my business partners. I don't want other people to snoop the data or know the data for whatever reason, because competitive reasons or whatever information. I don't want other people to know, because these are my secrets for my business, for my family, whatever it is. But however, most of these uh, the 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 tools and applications and the technologies which are provided by the mobile phone vendors, applications, and all those things are actually sufficient for a day-to-day secret communications and privacy communications. But however, when people are doing something beyond illegal, maybe drug dealings, or maybe something they wanted to do something beyond, they wanted to do something damage to the public or countries, whatever it is that they're stealing some government things, all those things. What they do is they don't go by these approved WhatsApp, Telegram, or whatever normal phone conversation, because they don't believe in all these things. That's why they actually get developed their own point-to-point communications, either through their applications which are designed specifically for them, or they go through even the communication channel. They don't want to go through your own mobile or your own internet. They actually go to the satellite communications channels and all those things.
Satellite communication.
But yeah, there is no way. If somebody is using that cryptophone itself, is obviously there is some suspiciousness, is unless they are some highly maybe prime minister is talking to his own home secretary or home minister. I don't know. Even they talk about they use these kind of things. But however, but these are the ones which are to as the technology is evolving, forensics and these things are always keep growing in hand. If you get a cryptophone, is it impossible? Yeah, definitely it is many a times tougher than the normal forensics. Sometimes many a times it's impossible to even because to know what is happening unless the provider who sold these things. He, in example, I don't know whether you know it or not. What happened is there is a Proton mail was there. Proton mail is actually don't share, or they in terms of entire email communication is encrypted even on the storage, and they also don't disclose to whose email address it is, who registered it is, from where they registered. But with the last 1 week, 2 weeks back, the Europe court came up with something that even Proton Mail has to maintain the records of the people who created this email, from when they created, who, what IP address they created, and all the stuff. If government asks for specific reasons with a court order, they are supposed to provide. So they are maintaining it now. So it all goes with the land of laws and all those things. But however, there are so many applications, they don't follow the land of laws. And we don't even, it is difficult even to find out who are those people creating these kind of things. But yes, this is a fight. I mean, there is no 100% easy way to do all those things.
Dear participants, any more questions?
Good afternoon.
Yeah, please.
Am I audible?
Yeah,
Yes,
you're
yes,
audible, sir. Clearly audible, please.
My name is Wasim. I'm affiliated with the University of Kashmir. Firstly, let me thank you for your enlightening and refreshing talk. What I'm going to ask is not basically a question, it's a request to please provide your opinion.
Mhm.
You rightly said that the volume of data is increasing humongously, and
Correct.
we do need some advanced storage technologies. If I remember correctly, people have been working on many storage technologies, advanced storage technologies, which are, which have high density, which have huge lifetime. So one among them is DNA data storage. It was pioneered in Harvard University when they were
Yeah.
able to store some data in DNA.
Yes.
And other storage technologies, advanced storage technologies, which we can see at the horizon, include nanophotonics-based optical storage, holographic storage. There are so many. I'm
Yes.
sure that you are aware of that. My request is to please opinionate on the fact that when these technologies become reality, would the methods of digital forensics change, or we are going to apply the traditional methods for forensics in those technologies also?
Correct.
Thank you.
So, yeah, I think you are right. So obviously, so there are two things here. Let us bifurcate the both points. One is whatever storage technologies in terms of where the data has to be stored. So whatever we have spoken during our course, starting from those olden days punch cards to the latest SSD and cloud storage, all those things, they are a logical evolution of increasing the space, faster access, and low cost. So these are the three fundamental driving factors which were forcing them to come up with a newer techniques in evolvement. But however, whatever you mentioned specifically, 90% these are related to the R&D only. Just to prove that we can use DNA, we can use multiple various, how we can store the data in the air itself, how we can store the data in DNA, how we can store the data in specific ways and means, whatever you mentioned. Wherever there is a possible pattern mapping is possible, they can store the data. But however, the point is what we understand. First of all, they are 90% R&D only. It just to prove that our technologically we are advanced. In practically, they may not come into the reality, at least for next couple of decades for sure. But however, let us visualize that they come into the practicality for whatever reason, where there is no cost is going to be a matter, because it's what is going to be a matter is they wanted to store some of the data of their own thing. It may be a secret key, digital key they wanted to keep in their bone, body, DNA, whatever it is, something like that may come up, because for a day-to-day purposes, nobody wanted to keep a huge amount of data in those kind of a newly evolved technologies or whatever it is. But however, when those things come, again, doesn't matter. All these things actually are the places where we are going to store the data. So what is important we have to understand is technologically, we need to use something to access this data. How we are going to access this data is what is going to be very important, or how we convert the patterns into a data is going to be something which has to be widely available. So when that comes into the picture, obviously the forensics is all about software tools or hardware tools, whatever we use, uh, basically to extract the meaningful data which is not straight away possible, or basically your entire forensics is all about extracting the data and basically telling people that he is the person or she is the person who has done it at this point of time. So that, because in digital world the problem is in a physical world we use photos, we use videos, we use audio and all those things, or where people touch it we use DNA. But in digital world, how can I say that I am the person who actually is the one who has sent a mail? Maybe it is a bad mail or a good mail, or I am the person who has uploaded a bad video or whatever it is. So that's where the whole pieces of IP addresses, location, all these forensics is actually a process of collecting all these logical entities which are acceptable to the court of law in that land of code, whatever it is, and putting them in a logical order so that we can prove the point. Yes, see, he is there in that time, that location. This computer is being used because his fingerprint is used. I mean, he not only access this thing, he access that thing, this thing, and IP address is that. So we are putting a big case scene to prove that he's the one. So techniques and technologies may not change, in my opinion. I mean, they may add more and more things to it. as the data storage locations are going to be different and data retrieval process are going to be different, we keep adding more and more. But the thought process and this whole process is not going to change. It's just that we're going to add more and more things. I think, I mean, I'm answering all these things through logically only, obviously, because that's how we've been evolved so far, right? I mean, just because tomorrow something new comes, we are not going to remove everything and come with a new thing. We are going to add more and more pieces because end of the day, the format is same. End of the day, the structure is same. End of the day, maybe if new things comes, we may say because this is something which we haven't experienced so far, it's a new thing. We are going to add this into our template, or we are going to add more tools, more techniques. I think, I mean, I don't know how far I'm able to answer you, but I just trying to tell you logically my opinion, because it's as you try, I mean, as you rightly asked, it's my opinion. I think that's how we're going to evolve in that space.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Sir, it has been known that volume of data is at rapid pace and therefore digital forensic investigations are much delayed. Yes. Is there any method, technique, parameters to identify forensics interesting files, sensitive files by eliminating? Yes. Yeah, that's exactly the course, right? We're going to go through it. We are going to find out the places. How, example, if I give my computer to you, if somebody says that I sent a mail from my computer, my email address to some prime minister saying that some threatening mail. So when they come and access my laptop, there are, yes, if you say it is going to be, you want to forensics towards more on email thing, we are going to touch only those places, those locations, those logs on the computer, either a place or a log, or we are going to talk to the respective people only in that direction so that we can minimize the whole cycle to extract the meaningful artifacts, this whole process. I think you will be covered in some use cases. I think Subramanian is going to talk about, I mean, I think he planned a couple of use cases. Typically, that's how he does it. I mean, he's going to not only show you the tools and techniques, but also use cases and how logically you can achieve your goal using those tools. Good guys, thank you, and I really appreciate.
These other participants are kindly requested to mute your phone.
Yeah. I think somebody did not mute the phone. But anyways, yeah. So I think thanks for asking a lot of questions. That proves that I mean, you are interested and genuinely. Thanks a lot for that. And but that's more important because anyways, we are spending time better. Try to extract some information or at least refresh our thought process and information. Please go to the data points what I have given. I will share this small PDF what I have created with the team so that you will get it. But there is nothing great in that. But I'm going to share you all those things by end of today, so you will get it. So I think take a little break unless you have questions. I'm happy to be here for some more time. But otherwise, if you have questions, I will answer. Otherwise, I will again get back onto this call at 3 o'clock for our next session.
Dear participants, this session has come to an end, and our distinguished speaker Chandrasekhar Reddy has given you some YouTube links to go through. I will request you kindly to go through all those video links, and please join us back 10 minutes before the session. That is, next session is going to be started at 3 o'clock. All the participants are distinguished professors, faculties, and industry persons, and also the people from other research department. So request you kindly to join 10 minutes before the next session, that is 3 o'clock. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir. This presentation is going very nicely and well organized, and we need more and more fundamentals, and we are all, our faculties are all decided to capture this knowledge from your side, and they are going to offer this course as an elective subject in our postgraduate MTech in cyber forensic and information security at SIT Tumkur. So thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. See you all at 3 o'clock.